spoke with Vice President Harris while she is out campaigning in Michigan on the stakes of this race and her approach to these last 2+ weeks. Take a listen.
In these waiting days, I want to ask you first, at the convention you cast yourself as a joyful warrior, but in recent rallies you've increasingly attacked former President Trump as an unstable and unhinged. Is that an effective closing? Is that an effective closing argument?
I think that one is not to the exclusion of the other. I have a great deal of optimism, as do the people who are here, about the future of our country. I think that's one of the things that is building the momentum that we have. People really do believe in what is the promise of America and our responsibility to fight for it. That is not in conflict with also being clear-eyed about the danger that Donald Trump poses based on the language that he has used and his admiration for dictators, his inability to really focus on the needs of the American people, in particular working people. These things are not in conflict. They all exist at the same time.
The critics who say the joy is gone, you respond?
Oh, I'm having a great time.
Let me ask, if I can, about one of the challenges the campaign faces right now. Polls show that there is a widening gender gap, that Donald Trump leads, particularly among men, by 16 points right now. Why is that, and why do you think there is a disconnect for you with men right now?
Well, let me tell you, you can look at this audience and you can see that there are people of every background and gender who are showing up by the thousands. And I think it is because they know I intend to be a president for all Americans. And that is how I'm campaigning to earn the vote of every American, not only about their gender, but about their geographic location, and unburdened by who they may have voted for in the past. I think this really is a moment, like we saw with the Republicans who are supporting me most publicly recently, that it's a time to put country before party and really, again, with a sense of optimism, fight for what we care about.
Just to be clear, though, men still say, by a 16% margin, they're supporting Donald Trump right now. Why do you think that is?
It's not the experience that I'm having, to be honest with you.
You think the men are on board?
Yeah, look around.
Then let me ask you, if I can, President Biden said this week that every president has to cut their own path. What is one policy that you would have done differently over these last 3.5 years than President Biden?
I mean, to be very candid with you, even including Mike Pence, vice presidents are not critical of their presidents. I think that really actually, in terms of the tradition of it and also just going forward, it does not make for a productive and important relationship.
He's now given you that green light with his comments that you can carve your own path. So now that you have this ability to say that, to be on your own?
Well, no, going forward, there is no question that I bring my own experiences and my own life experiences.
Is there a policy that stands out to you in particular, either?
Sure. I mean, my approach to what we need to do around Medicare covering home health care, born out of my experience of taking care of my mother. My priority on housing, one, because I know what it means, affordable housing and the ability to buy a home. Again, my own experience, my mother saved up, and not until I was a teenager was she able to do it. But also I know that for so many young people who I speak with around our country, the American dream is just really out of reach. So my policy about $25,000 down payment assistance to help them get their foot in the door. The work that I have been doing and will bring to the presidency around emphasizing small businesses as being part of the real backbone of America's economy. Those are the experiences and the ideas that I have that are about moving forward and really in being a part of the next generation of leadership in America.
Last one, I know I got to let you go. We heard some people chanting happy birthday to you. You have a milestone birthday on Sunday. Chivalry is not dead. I'm not going to say what age you're turning then, but you talk about generational change. What does generational change mean to you?
I think it's about a state of mind, and it is about understanding that we should be focused on this moment, and this is a very particular moment where there is a lot happening in our country that is about innovation, that are about really new approaches to long-standing challenges, and it's a new generation of thinking as much as anything else.
This hour, we are expecting to see the vice president at a campaign event at a UAW union hall in Lansing, Michigan. And that is where we start this hour. Joining me at the table, my friends, MSNBC political analyst Juanita Tolliver is here, plus contributor to The Grew and professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University, MSNBC contributor Jason Johnson. Also with us, political strategist and MSNBC senior analyst Matt Dowd is here, though not at the table with me, which I would truly, truly enjoy. Matt Dowd, one day day, we will make that happen. All right, we need to talk to me about the balance here that the vice president is trying to strike, which is she does need to sharpen the contrast with the ex-president. She knows that. She has to do that. That is, by nature, a rather dark comparison in contrast, given his mental acuity and his vision for this country. And at the same time, she launched this campaign saying, we want this to be about joy. Joy is difficult to sustain as a strategy over a period of time, right? Joy is sort of the thing you want at the end. It is the crescendo. So how do you do that in the next 2.5 weeks?
Well, I think yesterday was a perfect example of it when she had the anti-abortion hecklers in the crowd say like something to her from the floor of the venue. And she said, I think you're at the wrong rally, and cracked a joke about Trump's smaller rallies. That hit all of those things that you just mentioned on the head. Contrast to Trump, what he prioritized, rally sizes instead of policy, engaging with the people directly, as well as joy. And she had fun in that moment, and that translated because the crowd picked up on it immediately. I will add the other thing she has to do in these last few days, shore up her base. And that's where you emphasize the Obamas hitting the campaign trail with her is going to come into play. Because when you have an orator like Barack Obama and a woman with the energy of do something like Michelle Obama out there, that is a force that is going to be driving, especially when we talk about Black and brown and younger voters, especially Black women voters, who have been the core of the Democratic Party since gaining increased access to the polls.
I recognize that you spend more time, Dr. Johnson, with young people than I do by virtue of being a college professor. My young people are very young. But you know, it's sort of the same thing in the sense that I have to be reminded sometime there is a generation of people who the only president they have been sort of mindful of during their consumption of news is Donald Trump. And so there is an element of when we talk about this generational divide, also saying it doesn't have to be this way. Right. This may be all that you have known, but this isn't actually what presidential leadership has historically been. And in some ways, having Barack Obama out there on the trail underscores that generational shift.
It does, but I also think it's important, like, you know, a 30-year-old is not a kid. And if you're 30, you didn't vote for Barack Obama. You weren't old enough to vote for Barack Obama, and you can be 31, 32 years old. So I think that the Obamas are out there to bring in Gen X, to bring in millennials. The younger people, the reason that there has been a challenge on both sides in galvanizing young people is they don't have their person yet. AOC has sort of become very much part of the system, and the younger generation hasn't quite come out. So the Harris campaign has to do a really good job of speaking to young people directly. I don't know that they have done that. That's one of the things that's been a criticism of the campaign. But I think the Obamas hit a much older crowd. If I talk to my students who are 21, 22 years old, 19 years old, they know who Barack Obama is. There's a picture of him and his family in the kitchen, right? But it's not necessarily somebody who motivates them the way that, say, you know, a younger politician or somebody who is more connected. You know, Angel Reese, Sexy Red. Somebody else probably moves them a bit more than Barack Obama.
I know the exact picture of the Obamas you were referencing, and the exact Bob.
I feel so left out here. I have no idea.
We'll send you a photo later.
It's the Christmas photo. Everyone has it. Yes.
Matthew, this sort of question of masculinity that has woven through this race, just in the last few weeks, Donald Trump calling white men who are voting for Harris cucks, as though that is a way. I mean, it's certainly not a way to appeal to people. It must be a way to shame them. If we're talking about her closing argument being about sharpening the contrast and leaning into the joy, his is basically threatening and bullying. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, this is such a time of, like, there's this such cultural definitional moment of what does it mean to be masculine in there. And Donald Trump and the MAGA world, as everybody I'm sure on this panel has watched them on social media and watched Donald Trump, defines it in a way that is actually, in my view, abusive. Their definition of masculinity is masculinity that is abusive and mean. And what I think the vice president does, and most of us who believe ourselves to be strong men, we define masculinity in a much more compassionate, loving, supportive way. And for myself, I think the strongest men are the ones that allow women or give that space for women to make their own decisions for themselves. Donald Trump and the MAGA world does not want that. They want a world where women no longer make decisions for themselves, as we see in the Dobbs decision, as we see in any number of things they've done in this. But I do think for all of the things we've talked about politically and where we are in a moment in time, we are in a moment in time where culturally, where are we going to take a turn and go to and have a definitional way of masculinity that is a much more broader and compassionate and open-minded way? Or are we going to have a closed-minded masculinity that, as I have said, leads to abuse and meanness?
I think we're all very aware that we follow this with a degree of intensity that would be absurd to expect of other folks, right? That folks aren't like sitting around talking about the Al Smith dinner, right? That's not like moving the needle, like the polling. So what it all becomes is a bigger picture and a bigger composite, right? That, you know, she, for example, can release a detailed policy memo reaching out to a specific community, but it fundamentally becomes about she's making an effort with this community. I'm thinking particularly of Black men, given that that is the policy she most recently rolled out. What more is there to do when you are 18 days away? You know, I keep saying weeks. When you said days, I sort of did
got tight.
Yeah, it's weeks. It's days.
I feel like it comes down to mobilization at this point. Honestly, this is the get out the vote effort that, let's be real, Barack Obama perfected in 2008 and 2012 that really galvanized people and got them to the polls. I think the scenario that we're living in right now is the reality that Election Day is the last day to vote, and people are leveraging tools. So when you put up the numbers about Georgia hitting 1 million early votes, North Carolina breaking records, and all these states really turning out people early, that's the only thing that makes me feel hopeful in this moment. Because once those people vote, that's when you're going to get the message from Democrats, hey, call your friends, mobilizing community, sign up for those volunteer shifts, right? That's what it's going to come down to. And I fully expect every engagement we see from Democrats to be a call to action at this point.
Can I ask you, the political scientist, to sort of help me rationalize something, which is there are folks who are upset because they see the polling averages and they feel that the sort of like doom around, well, maybe he's pulling ahead in this poll just isn't helpful in general, isn't helpful to enthusiasm. At the same time, you have the Harris campaign very clear that they believe they are the underdogs in this race and wanting to be sure that they don't lose the attention and the momentum of their voters, that when people go and have to stand in line sometimes for 2-3 hours, that they say, I am standing in this line because I have been convinced that this race is going to come down to my vote and her vote and his vote. So which one is it?
It's both, and it depends on where you are. And Alicia, I think you make an excellent point when you talk about how we do this versus regular people.
Right.
I won't say my friend's name, but literally got a text message from a friend of mine on Wednesday, an Atlanta voter. He texted me, he's like, hey, I didn't know Cornel West was running for president. Literally, had no idea. And he's early voting, right? So it tells you Democrats are sitting there worrying about, oh, my gosh, Jill Stein. There are people who don't even know that who are galvanized to go out and vote. So the Harris campaign has to always tell everybody, hey, we're underground, we're nervous, because you don't know what bits of information are creeping through to their heads. And I suspect that the early voter in Michigan, that the person standing in line in Michigan, that the person in Wisconsin probably has a different sense of concern than somebody in Georgia, than somebody in Texas. Because when you have been convinced that you're in a swing state, a battleground state. I used to live in Ohio when it mattered, right? I got
different time, different era.
I got so many phone calls from Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, I thought we were neighbors, right? Like, they were calling all the time because, oh, I know Ohio was important. Well, now it no longer is. So that's what's happening in different places now. The people who matter, they know they're in a place that matters, Arizona, Michigan, Georgia, and the Harris campaign doesn't want anyone resting on their laurels. They don't want to make the mistake of Hillary Clinton.
Matthew, I want to ask you about those early voting numbers, record numbers in Georgia and North Carolina, too. The state broke record turnout for its first day of early voting. What does that tell you?
Well, I'm going to pick up what's just been talked about to paraphrase Ecclesiastes and the song Turn, Turn, Turn. For everything, there is a season. And the season now,